You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's guest, who is still a current service member after 30 years and a highly decorated combat correspondent and public affairs officer with multiple deployments overseas. Just an incredible story. Of course, somebody who connected us, a friend in the military connected us, and she has an amazing book out as well. We'll get to that coming up in just a few moments. Our normal announcements, please continue to leave us Apple reviews, help us grow the show, give us 5 stars, tell us why you love the show. And certainly it'll help us grow this Hazard Ground community. And we appreciate all the love and support you guys give us. Don't forget to follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Hazard Ground Podcast. Check out the website, hazardground.com. You can get pictures and bios of all of our guests on there as well. And our promotion with Amazon is on our website as well. Go to hazardground.com, hazardground.com as I stumble over the name of my own website. Click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. It'll redirect you to Amazon. You can do all your normal Amazon shopping. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend, and then we'll donate a percentage of that back to some of the great charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. Works the same way from your smartphone, redirects you to the app. So if you save all your credit card information, they're really easy and user-friendly. So again, hazardground.com. Check out the website there as well. All right, this week's guest is actually still currently serving in the military. She spent 18 years in the Marine Corps and then switched over to the Naval Reserves, where she holds the rank of lieutenant commander. She spent most of her time, all of her time, as a matter of fact, in the public affairs realm as a combat correspondent and a journalist, and now works in naval public affairs. She's got 5 combat tours and has won multiple awards over the last 20 years while covering combat operations and military exercise places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Guam, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Romania, Poland, all of it. She has her first book out, titled Heroes Live Here, a tribute to Camp Pendleton Marines Since 9/11. And she also actually deployed as well with the 75th Ranger Regiment. She was just named one of Success Magazine's top 50 women of influence. And she is Amy Forsythe, joining us here on the Hazard Ground. Amy, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks. Great to see you this morning. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Oh, absolutely. A good friend of ours, Scott Using, you guys were on a book tour with him, and Fred Galvin, who we just interviewed a while back, and his book, A Few Bad Men, about the Marines and his trials and tribulations. So I just love getting that connective tissue together with a lot of our guests and connecting them all for our audience. But certainly an amazing career, 30 years, still going strong. Where's the finish line for you?
Couple years out. I'm just, as they say, riding it until the wheels come off. So I'm just continuing my service, and, working in public affairs and media industry is just such a great career. No 2 days are ever the same. And so it's just every opportunity is just a chance to learn and grow and work with great people.
Well, of course, now, you're so thankful for the politically charged environment and everything that we're involved in getting blown one way or another. So you're certainly not bored or ever static, given the way the world is right now.
That's right. It's just what's today? Wake up and go, okay, what is happening and what fires can I put out? What can I solve? Who can I help? And how can I make an impact?
Yeah. And who did what? That created some sort of shitstorm that nobody really cares about, that we're blowing out of proportion. Exactly. Welcome to military public affairs. All right. Start back at the beginning, because 30 years, a long, long time. And certainly there wasn't a war on terror going on when you signed up. So how and why did you end up in the Marines?
Oh. Yeah, my family thought I was crazy, but I grew up in Northern California, just north of San Francisco. I went to an all-girls Catholic school, but I was just so, drawn to the military. It's just that patriotic spirit. My grandparents all served in the military. Even my grandmother, who was an Army nurse during World War II, she served overseas in Guam and Saipan. And I just kind of grew up hearing their stories and being sort of so interested in serving myself. And San Francisco at that time in the 80s was a great military town with a lot of Navy and Marines stationed there. And I used to go to the Fleet Weeks and just was really drawn to that. So I just loved the thought of serving. And so I enlisted after high school. not a big transition, because you go to school, you wear a uniform, and you go and do what the nuns tell you to do. And in the Marine Corps, it's pretty much the same thing. So, but I definitely wanted to be in public affairs. I wanted to take photos and tell stories of our troops. And so I got the job that I wanted, luckily. And my recruiter, ensured that I had that MOS. And so it was just really one great deployment after another, kind of caught this wave, and I'm still riding that wave. And so, but my first duty station, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, just after the movie, a few men came out.
Major Nargessa, commanding officer, Marine Ground Forces, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Yes.
Yes. And I thought, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into? But that story in the movie and the portrayal was not far from the truth of how the Marines operated down there
really?
In Guantanamo Bay.
Hollywood didn't take a lot of liberties with that?
No, I mean, it was based on a true story.
Oh, really?
But the culture there was pretty much the same, but this code red, the seriousness of it, and guarding the fence line. And at that time, you can imagine, Fidel Castro, it was a very tenuous time. It was very, very kind of stressful. And so when there were only a couple handful of women in the military, in the Marines and the Navy down there. So of course, being new concept, right, of the women in the military. So it was interesting deployment for me. But during that time, as you may recall, some of your viewers out there, when the Cuban and Haitian exodus occurred in 1994, when tens of thousands of people fled Cuba and Haiti and tried to make their way to America by swimming or boat or raft. And so we picked them all up and corralled them on the base at Guantanamo Bay. And so there was about 60,000 migrants living on a base that was designed for 4,000 people. So that was my first introduction to a joint task force, humanitarian operations, real world mission right out of the gate. And it was just an amazing experience. So I got to interview all of our top leaders, Chief of Navy Operations, the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And here I was, Lance Corporal Amy Forsythe, when I was working at the radio and TV station there covering stories. So really got a taste of just how military operations turn into, full-fledged humanitarian response. And we conducted a non-combatant evacuation operation. And so it was just a great introduction to military operations. So
media is so different now than it was back then. How much resistance did you run into, not only because you were media, but also because you were a female?
Well, just being there on the ground when first arriving, it was, of course, the Marines were like, what is she doing here? Kind of feeling. So I just tried to do the best job I could, tell the story, share the courage of the Marines and sailors operating down there, and, do the best job that I could, not knowing why do they hate me so much, but learned that the Marine Corps culture wasn't this romantic idea of service and, semper fi and brotherhood, sisterhood, and things like that. Things have changed quite a bit, luckily. But being at that first initial kind of step off for me was an introduction to the Marine Corps and the culture in the military. So, but I learned a lot, and that was a great thing. I learned so many great lessons about interacting. And we were only 90 miles off the coast of Florida, but it felt like a million miles away, because phones and internet was just starting to begin, and emails traffic was just starting. So the good old fashioned days of writing letters and once a week phone call, maybe. So just kind of seeing that transition now where we are today, so deploying and being far from home was not anything new to me, but I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the adventure, the travel, the mission, and trying to get the message out.
Unfortunately, it's part of your existence as a female in the military, and I kind of just am blunt about it, but how much sexual harassment did you deal with being there early on?
I would say, luckily for me, not so much of the sexual harassment or It was just when you're on the outside of a group, when you're on the outside, trying to be on the inside when you're not really wanted or, accepted was tough. But so it was very lonely, for the most part. There were only a couple handful of other female Marines, but we all worked different schedules. But once the Joint Task Force kicked off and we had this full-on operation, and I was out there taking photos, telling stories. I was on the radio every day, so people knew who I was because they listened to the radio. It was the only form of communication, and they saw my reporting. They really began to accept me as like, okay, we want you to come and cover our story, or we'll let you on the inside and we'll take you along and we'll show you what is going on down here. So it was really a way to break in and let people know that I wasn't trying to change their culture. I just wanted to cover them and really highlight their stories. And so I always use that as a way to kind of soften the blow or break the ice and reassure them that I'm not trying to be, an infantry, Marine. I'm just here to take some photos. And so once they kind of understand that I'm there to document and share the courage it takes to serve, I can gain access and gain trust that way.
No, I mean, listen, the intensity of the assignment, I think, on one hand, and we'll probably advance forward to it, but it's good and it's bad in the sense where there's not a lot of time for, bad stuff to happen because everyone's laser focused on what is in front of them. In the same respect, it's like as you move forward, it's hard to maintain that level of intensity and focus throughout other parts of your career because everything lulls, right? It ebbs and flows from an operational tempo standpoint.
Well, sure. I've luckily, knock on wood, I have never had any first hand accounts of any sexual harassment or sexual assault or anything like that. I've kind of learned early lessons to just mind my business. I never really put myself in a situation where there could be an issue. I was very mindful of that. And so, but not to say that there are definitely times where it's very obvious that people don't want you there, because you're a woman or just some gender
bias, if you will.
Bias, definitely. You have to work twice as hard to be considered half as good, and there's always can we trust you? Or what are you doing here? Why are you here? Mentality. But I just roll with it. And, if I'm being paid to do a job, I'm there to do a job. And, I tune those people out, avoid them, and let the chips fall where they may. So on the other hand, I've worked with so many great people and that really want women to succeed and want the mission of telling the story to be completed. And that's all that matters. And so I've worked in a lot of joint environments and been on assignment in multinational and joint. And, I just don't let that bother me. And so just being able to push through that and not take it personally. Nothing is personal with me. And so not to say there's been some ups and downs and, good days and bad like everyone, but I don't let that bother me at all because women have been serving in the military. Like I said, my grandmother was a nurse in the Army in World War II, and I didn't think it was sort of a new concept, but there are people out there kind of conditioned to think that women don't belong in the military. But I think over the last 30 years, it's been great to see firsthand just how far women have come. And so even into combat operations and now the policy that supports women conserving combat MOSs. And it's been great to see. I always kind of caution, be careful what you ask for because you might just get it. And sure enough, we got it for women. And there are women serving and doing the best that they can to, contribute and serve our nation.
All right, let's fast forward a little bit to 9/11, because obviously your career takes a dramatic turn after that. But where are you? What are you doing? And sort of what happens right after that time frame?
Yeah, so I served 8 years on active duty. I was deployed to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Then I served at Camp Pendleton. And from there, I left active duty so I could finish my bachelor's degree. which was a normal career progression. And I stayed in the reserves because I didn't want to leave the Marine Corps. But back then, you really had to attend day school, like day classes. They didn't have online or any, options like that. So I stayed in the reserves, and then 9/11 happened. And sure enough, I got the call to be mobilized in 2002 to Afghanistan. And this was before Iraq, and Afghanistan was still very new, and there weren't a lot of boots on the ground there. They were just really ramping up. There's just a few civil affairs task force and just some really early days. And so I went to Afghanistan, and I was a public affairs chief. I was a staff sergeant in the Marines for a civil affairs task force there in Kabul. And they were just building up Bagram and building up the embassy complex. And so it was just a great deployment for the Army. I was the joint part of the joint task force for the Army. So it was great to be part of an Army civil affairs, and they were doing amazing things. We were going out every day, delivering school supplies, hospital supplies, books to the university, and really can roam freely for the most part in Kabul and outside of Kabul and back and forth to Bagram. We used to drive that 1 hour trip back and forth, and it was great to see the country without really the threat of being so dangerous. And then I returned from that deployment. I ended up getting my bachelor's degree from California State University at San Marcos, bachelor's in communications. And so it was a great fit. But then sure enough, the war in Iraq continued on, and I volunteered for a deployment to Iraq in 2006. And the Marines were really filling out Anbar province and trying to just,
Fallujah and Ramadi at that point in time too.
That's right. The combat operations were at the height in that year of 2006 in Anbar, which included Anbar, Fallujah, Ramadi, Habaniya, Taqadum, Al Assad Air Base, and so I was assigned to the Marines there, and so for a year-long deployment covering combat operations.
Now, you said you volunteered for that. Why'd you volunteer?
I did. Well, I felt, you just can't relax when you're at home and there's still combat operations going on. And you're like, I want to be a part of that. That's my unit. I was assigned to 1st Marine Expeditionary Force at Camp Pendleton, and they were really just doing 1 year on, 1 year off rotations. And so I got into the rotation, and they built out the team, a combination of active duty and reservists. And so I'd finished my bachelor's degree, and I thought that was a great way to, I'll say, pay back my student loans, but also contribute to the mission.
No, it was a great way to pay back. I did the same thing.
Had to pay that back. I didn't know how else I was going to do that. But I just wanted to continue my service. And so I thought that would be a great plug-in.
Is there any point in time as you're heading into Iraq, clearly knowing that the level of violence is different than what you saw in Afghanistan in 2002, any hesitancy about your own security and safety, or at least, before you were doing schools and hospitals and everything else, that's you had to know going in that wasn't what you were going to be doing?
Well, I did know the danger, but I didn't realize just how dangerous it was going to be. I just, as public affairs, you're kind of like, you feel like you're immune from the danger because you're like, oh, those are frontline troops. Those are combat engineers. Those are combat operations. But when we got there, of course, we were expected to go on combat operations and document and or escort media. So those were the things that we were doing and every day. And so you just kind of stepped off, not really worried about the danger for yourself. You're just really wanting to serve the mission. So
was there a oh bleep moment for you on that deployment? Like, oh, hey, this isn't what I signed up for.
Well, when you step off and you write your will and you pack away your goods and you say your goodbyes, you're really kind of saying that I fully accept and understand what I'm getting into. And so I'll tell you, there were several moments, close calls for sure, where rounds are whizzing over your head and you hear a mortar drop, a block away, and you can feel it, you can hear it, and you hear the alarms going off, so danger close at all times. And And when, my job there was so they had stopped doing a lot of media embeds because it was just too dangerous, too many media, top media too, the networks had stopped bringing people in. So they were relying on our photos and our video footage for the nightly reporting. And so we would go out and get, the B-roll that was needed to tell the story. And so I thought for sure, I was out every day. I was taking a satellite dish around to do satellite uplinks for our commanders, to uplink with media as well. So I thought if anybody's going to get it, it might be me, just being unlucky at the wrong place at the wrong time. And so a lot of close calls for sure. But I was already in the mindset that if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. I'm okay with that. That was the price to pay, so to speak. And so, and being so busy, I remember days where there were so many memorial services, we just couldn't cover all of them, and it was just an emotional roller coaster. At one point, I think that September, October, November of 2006, we were losing upwards to 100, 125 people per month. And so you just couldn't cover all the memorials, which was really sad to, just knowing that they were just happening so fast. You just didn't even have time to acknowledge fully and understand until you get home and you're like, wow, that was very dangerous.
Did you have to dissociate yourself sort of mentally and emotionally from memorial services and what you saw and everything? Because, again, I mean, journalism, as they say, which might be a relic of times gone by. But it's one of those things where, you have an obligation to report the story as factual and as is. But in the same respect, some of these people are people that you went out on missions with, or you knew, or had a degree of separation from. And, there's a certain amount of emotional and personal toll that takes on you. But I guess, still, in the vein of your job, you kind of have to just report the facts as is. I mean, how hard was that for you?
Well, I'll tell you, at a point there, I was going out getting footage of Marines and soldiers operating in the field. We're doing, house to house searches and vehicle stops and going out on the rivers as we were training Iraqis, police and border and army. And whenever I'd come back, I'd get the footage and photos, and then I'd hear 2 or 3 days later, like, oh, that sergeant was killed, or that person was killed, or that person just lost their legs. And so I had footage and photos of them talking and, footage of them as I interviewed them. And so they were like, Staff Sergeant Forsythe is not allowed to go out anymore, because every time she would take photos and video of someone, they ended up getting killed or injured. And so, it did take a toll. It was very hard, because that was the last capture photo or video that I could send to the families and make a video tribute, like a memorial for that fallen service member. So having those last images of them alive, and then being able to share that with Gold Star families, later, and having that last image was very impactful. And so, but being able to reflect on it now has been really wonderful to, share that with people and realize we know now that photos and video are so important. And so that's why commanders have prioritized that. It's like, get the combat camera out there, get the public affairs, get the photographer out there to get the photos, tell the stories, because not only is it documenting, but it's telling the story in a historical archives as well. Because without photos and stories, it kind of evaporates and it becomes less memorable.
When you finish this deployment, was there one particular mission or shot or tape that you got that stands out to you as like, whoa, this was some of the best work we did on this whole tour?
Well, there were so many, but a body of work really, and showcasing the depth and breadth of the tour for 12 months in Anbar province. There were so many stories to go back and archive. But during that deployment, People may remember Major Megan McClung, and she was a public affairs officer who's one of my bosses that I worked for, and she was killed while escorting media, Newsweek and Fox News crew in Ambar from Ramadi. And so that was at the tail end of our deployment in December. And she was killed, and that really made an impact on people because one, she was a woman, one, she was an officer. Number three reason is she was public affairs. So really the most unlikely candidate to be killed in combat, if you think about it. So that really flipped the script on a lot of things and took people by surprise. And of course, we had a lot of photos of her and video just from our deployment. And so really just looking over those photos now and, kind of the memory fades. The memory fades, but thank God we have photos to kind of, she's frozen in time at that age and at that time in her life where she was on deployment doing that. And so a lot of people remembered her, and thankfully through those photos that we can share with people of what she was like.
And she was also the first female officer in the Marines to be killed.
That's right. And, and she was a Naval Academy graduate, triathlete, super moto runner. Everyone knew her for her running. And so the least likely candidate that we would think traditionally to be killed, but her and two other soldiers that were in a vehicle were hit by an IED. And, that could have been me, could have been any of us really. And so just to put that flame out was really hard. And so it's just still even hard to even understand. But when people realize that, women are willing, able, and capable of serving, it really does bring home that it's an all hands on deck effort. And if women especially are willing to risk it all, put on a uniform, kit up, and step off, that should mean something. And I think in today's environment, that means a lot. And so we've kind of moved the needle in terms of, especially for women serving, saying, I'm just as much putting myself at risk too. Don't you see that I am here? I want to serve and continue the mission and do the work. And so I think by showing and reminding people that women also were killed and in combat, that means a lot. Share their stories.
She's also the first graduate of the Naval Academy, first female graduate of the Naval Academy to be killed in combat as well. So a lot of, unfortunately, obviously, but a lot of firsts there in that whole thing. As I understand it, though, on her tombstone, her sort of media motto was emblazoned on there. Do you remember it?
That's right. Her, and I worked with her for many years, even before that deployment. Her motto was be bold, be brief, and be gone. And that was her testament, or the way she coached and did her media training, is telling commanders and Marines to, when you get in front of the camera and you step up to the mic, to be bold, be brief, and be gone. That was her mantra. And I have it here, a copy of that. Well, you can't really see it, but yeah,
you can see the headstone. She's buried in Arlington National Cemetery, so it's on there.
That's right. And so people can go and visit. And so it was just a natural fit for her parents' decision for her to be buried there at Arlington, surrounded by, colleagues, other alumni of Naval Academy, and other, fellow service members who died in that year of 2006, because they're somewhat lined up chronologically.
Yeah. And again, a very, very phrase that is uttered a million times over into any meeting that I've ever walked into in my life in the military. Be bold, be brief, be gone. Stop talking. Especially in the Zoom world now that we have to do it in, it's like, dear Lord. Anyway, but we digress. So from that sadness, that deployment ends. Is there any thought, with losing somebody like Megan, of sort of winding it down for you at this point? Did it give you any pause for what you wanted to do, or was there more left for you at this point? Where are you mentally after this third deployment?
Yeah, so I returned to Oceanside, California, and I started graduate school, actually, with no real intention of ever redeploying, because we thought, okay, the surge in 2006, combat operations, Anbar was sort of improving the conditions there. And sure enough, though, I got recalled again, or I somewhat volunteered to go back to the same place in Anbar in 2008. So it was 12 months on, 12 months off. I had started school, took a break in my master's degree at University of San Diego, and I returned to the same place in Anbar province with the same unit for another year-long deployment in 2008. And no regrets at all. The danger was not, the risk was sort of minimalized at that point because the surge had taken hold, the awakening in Anbar had started to hold, and we turned the tide, but still very dangerous nonetheless. And did another deployment in 2008, back to the same place. And if I hadn't gone back there, and you know how awful it was, I would not have believed the improvements that were made in Ramadi. The government center was rebuilt, schools, colleges. So we did a lot of openings, we did a lot of ribbon cuttings, we did a lot of process improvement during that year as well. In 2008, conditions had been improved. And so I said, if it can be done in Ramadi, Iraq, it can be done anywhere, right? In that short amount of time. So I did see progress. And
that was your last deployment to Iraq, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So two separate deployments to Iraq.
And the only reason I say that, I'm sorry, I apologize for cutting you off, but just for frame of reference, I ended up there for the closeout of Iraq in 2011. And I remember remarking how things had started to take a downturn from what there was in 2008, 2009. And everything that the term hull velocity is the best way it's been described for anybody who's into boating or sailing. Hull velocity sort of dictates how fast a sailboat can go, regardless of wind speed and everything else, because of the way it's made. We had hull velocity in Iraq in about 2009. It was never going to get any better than that. And that's when things started to take a downturn in 2010, ultimately in 2011 when we left. But I was just kind of surprised to hear you say that, because I remember when I left in 06 and got back in 11, I'm like, I don't know how much better things really got around here. Like, it doesn't look like it's all that vastly improved. And that was sort of the reason why I wanted to put that frame of reference in there. So you saw a lot of improvement.
Definitely, at least in Anbar province. Yeah. So they had done a lot of work in 2007. The conditions had improved so that, construction can continue and things can be rebuilt, and contracts were up and running, and people were actually rebuilding what had been destroyed in 2004 through 2006. So I saw the colleges, Agriculture College, and other, key places in the government center improve. At least they can start to function again. And people started to return to their homes and things like that.
Is the operational tempo the same as it was back then, or is it slowed down a little bit from your first deployment?
Yeah, a little bit slower. People could take a little bit of a breather, and people weren't dying as much, and so you can move. You can get things done a little bit more because you're not doing the combat battle assessments and the memorial services and things like that. So you could get outside the wire and do things a little bit better in 2008. So that was great, knowing that we're just reporting on progress and trying to keep rowing. In 2008 was a turning point, I think, for that. And then I returned from there, finished grad school in 2009. And then I got turned on to a program with the Navy, a direct commission officer program. So I was working for a Marine colonel at the time, and he said, "Hey, Amy, why don't you check out this program in the Navy? It's direct commission officer. You just finished your master's degree. Getting promoted to gunny was on the horizon, and but you hit service career limitations when you're just enlisted. You can only serve so long for certain ranks. And so I thought, I love the Marine Corps. I didn't want to leave, but I applied for the program. I got selected, and I have no regret. So transitioning from a Marine staff NCO to a brand new ensign in the Navy at the time. And so that was about 12 years ago. And I've been afforded so many, a wider spectrum of opportunities to serve in the Navy Reserves as a public affairs officer. So no regrets whatsoever. I returned back to the Defense Information School and attended the public affairs public affairs officer course, and that was great. And so from there, though, I the mission continued because Afghanistan now had, lingered on and taken some downturns. And so I got mobilized in 2012 to serve on a joint task force for the NATO led mission back to Afghanistan. So I got mobilized and again to pay off graduate school loans. So
we're in some sort of vicious cycle here, Amy.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Get a degree,
right.
deploy to pay it off. Get a degree, deploy to pay it off. Just stop getting degrees and you don't have to go anywhere.
I know, but I just wanted to top it off to make sure that I checked all the boxes and we're kind of keeping pace with colleagues. And if I wanted to, go on to do other things, that's kind of the boxes you have to check, I feel like, in order to keep rowing and keep competitive, at least in the, military. So I deployed and got assigned to a German-led NATO command in Mazar-e-Sharif in the north of Afghanistan. And things were sort of steady, but there was definitely danger. But our main mission at that time was to train and advise and assist building the Afghan army, the border, the police. And so that was the main focus of effort there.
With Afghanistan being in such a state of flux at that point in time, comparatively speaking to Iraq, when you see the level of combat that's involved there, how is it different and how, heavy was it?
Well, I'll say that under the NATO command and the German-led, their approach was much different. And they had a different relationship with the local area in the Regional Command North, which it was all of the northern provinces in Afghanistan. So I can probably only count on one hand how many, either combat actions or combat deaths that we had. We had a couple helicopters go down and a few other mishaps that resulted in injury and death. But, the NATO had just a different approach, and we were there to advise them as well and model for them. But that was just such a great experience, and getting out and really then trying to shift the focus into guiding the Afghan media. So I would meet with my media counterparts regularly, and we'd talk about journalism. We'd talk about how to stand up, civil society. And so it was really, building a nation with one handshake at a time through different meetings, different opportunities to kind of fill in the gaps there with the media. And there I had a very mature media cohort there with different media outlets reporting. And so we did our best to try to work with them and encourage them to continue reporting, continue pressing the envelope in terms of telling the story that was going on. But Taliban were always lurking around, and we were, I'd visit Kunduz, Mazar-e-Sharif, other places that were strongholds and, places of the original battles in the Northern Alliance, and just reading some of that story and the history that was there. It was never far from mind when in that northern area in the Northern Alliance up there.
This is your final combat deployment between Iraq and Afghanistan, right? You'll end up other places in the world. At the time, did you think it was your final one?
I did. I said, this is it. I'll go one more time. And I thought surely the war in Afghanistan couldn't linger beyond 15 years. Right. But I came home. I got a civilian job working for defense media activity and took a job in Guam, the island of Guam, and was covering all the large-scale exercises in the Indo-Pacific region, traveling to Sri Lanka, Palau, Singapore, Malaysia, just some amazing opportunities covering all the large-scale exercises. And of course, it was hot, very hot, with China, North Korea, all the activity going on there with everything that was going on. So it was fascinating to be in that area, just shifting mindset away from Central Command to Indo-Pacific Command, where things are really hot. But sure enough, there was another opportunity to deploy. I thought I was on mission to go to Djibouti, Africa, because that was one place I hadn't been yet. But when I got assigned to Joint Special Operations Command in North Carolina, they said, we actually need to remission you. We have an urgent need, an opening in Afghanistan at Bagram Air Base. And I said, okay, well, I really signed up to go to Djibouti, Africa, but the needs of the military, were a priority. And I said, sure, send me, I'll go again to Afghanistan. I felt confident that I knew the mission, I knew what to expect. And because I had been there, I even studied Farsi. I had a lot of media contacts that I was still in touch with. So it was just really returning to a place that I was very familiar with. So so that was a great opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, are you ever feeling like, here we go again? Like I thought I was trying to break this cycle and now I'm, back where I started kind of deal?
No, I love that environment. I really do enjoy the op tempo. I love the adventure of it. So I was excited. I really did want to go. And I mean, I joke with people that I used to make a living going to war, but it truly carried me through and got my school loans paid and has afforded me some great opportunities. But because I have all the institutional knowledge of what was done in 2003, 2013, and then, continued to study the area and understand the media landscape, understand what people are saying and thinking and hearing back home, and ways to fill the gaps, how to cover those stories, what's the priority, and to help not shape the message, but tell the story in an honest way. And because everyone around me on those deployments, it might have been their first time. And so I can help them say, well, back in these days, or here's the geography, let's look at the map. This is where this happened. This is where that happened, and provide some historical context. And so I kind of grew up through my 30s and my 40s, sort of plugging in, plugging out. But, as a reserve PAO, we should all be plug and play and kind of in step with these issues if we are at war, being ready to go at any time. And that's what we're there for. So there wasn't a lot of ramp up time, but things change over a course of 2 or 3 or 5 years. So it was a little bit of a learning experience. But in Afghanistan, it's always the same players, people there. So nothing changes really there. So it was really like nothing had changed.
So to that end, though, it's like, by the time you get to the mid 2013, 2015, 16 range, it becomes Forgotistan. Like, it was never talked about on the evening news ever. If there was somebody killed, it was buried as the 4th or 5th story. It never led with anything. Clearly, we weren't having national media embeds running in and out of Afghanistan, right? I mean, I'm sort of spitballing here, just thinking that there wasn't a lot, even if there was action going on, there wasn't a lot of people desiring to cover it. So in the grand picture, from when you first get there to this time, how much did you notice the sort of civilian media coverage alter and change?
Well, it sort of went in ebbs and flows. But in my 2018 deployment, because I was assigned to the task force there, which we had, Green Berets, we had Rangers, we were training the commandos. We had some very serious missions, and that was really the only game in town where we were doing targets, and, ODAs were out at the front lines and, trying to protect the northern borders and really doing some partner training and trying to really stand up those forces. So I had Wall Street Journal at the time. I had Marty Skovlin, who was starting up his Coffee or Die magazine.
I know Marty. Marty was a former guest here on the Hazard Ground.
Yeah, so it was great to kind of be able to select who we could, bring into this very elite, very exclusive coverage opportunity. So I would say we always had media interest. Newsweek, Time Magazine. We had some really top tier media in 2018 coming in. And, obviously watching last August was just, awful to see how things, all of a sudden now there's interest in, what was going on in Afghanistan. But yeah, the media obviously covering it, the people who cared knew what was going on and, tried to bring it to the front. But everyone, obviously Americans were just sort of over it, not interested or like confused as to why are we still there? What are we doing? And so last August was just heartbreaking for anyone who's ever stepped foot in Afghanistan. We were never at war with Afghans. So the culture, the people, the landscape, the ancient history there is just, it's really just majestic. It's just an amazing place. And so it was just really hard to watch the pullout in Afghanistan and understand how hard that was to see.
How did it affect you personally?
Well, the whole month of August, I was, watching TV. I was so angry. I was just sick to my stomach, really just ill the whole month watching what had happened and furious because it didn't have to be that way. And for anyone who served there, it's just the closure was always sort of unknown. Like, how is this going to happen? And how can we do this with dignity and make sure that no one gets hurt? And so that we felt as if we won something, or maybe just a break even. Can we just break even here? After we'd lost so much treasure, can we just break even? Can we just leave peacefully, shake hands and move out or something, turn it over to the Taliban? That's fine, but it didn't have to be this dramatic loss of life. And so I was putting together my book, Heroes Live Here, and which is a tribute to Marines of Camp Pendleton who had served and sacrificed so much in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the bulk of those Marines that were killed at the Abbey Gate in Afghanistan were from Camp Pendleton. So within hours of learning this, the front gate had become a monument and a tribute to those that we had lost. And so I'd had to put that in the book, Heroes Live Here.
I'm curious, are you mad as much about the withdrawal itself and the exit, or the coverage of it? I mean, does that make it a double whammy for you from somebody who is in that space and understands sort of the background of how that should have been presented to the world?
No, I think that the coverage was okay, but it wasn't good news. It wasn't good the way it was covered, but media, did the best they could, I think, but it wasn't set up for success in the first place. So you kind of got what we deserved as far as like, how are we covering this, from a media perspective. But it was just an awful example of how we didn't plan properly. And so I think that it was just really awful, just in my perspective, watching it and knowing that there's tens of thousands of troops out there who served in Afghanistan, suffered, sacrificed everything. And this is what we got. This is how it ends. So it was just awful. I feel like it was just awful. So the accountability piece, is tough to grapple with, and the aftermath of it. So something between the podium to what was happening, there was a big disconnect. And so, and I know behind the scenes, like what we're saying and what we're doing, left hand meet right hand, is not happening. So could we just get an honest accounting? Can we just let's be frank, let's be clear, let's be honest about what is happening. The American people can take it. It's just, let's just be honest. Let's just say what we're doing.
This turns into a much bigger conversation we don't need to have.
Yeah.
But in short, it's, all of us, I think, who wore a uniform, who deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq for that matter, just to have been in combat, understand the premise of taking the accountability. Look, we all understand the old adage, right? You're going to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. The bad things are going to happen in combat. And just because we were exiting doesn't mean it's not combat, right? You don't just run and leave. You don't just retreat. You have a hasty or predicated withdrawal that is done in a timely fashion. We left Iraq and everybody knew when we were leaving there, and none of the bad stuff happened because we did it the right way. Well, this wasn't the case. And so, again, the accountability piece is always still the toughest part that all of us are grappling with and really are frustrated about. I mean, we all understand military leaders make mistakes. They do the wrong things. They make the wrong decisions. Fine. We can live with it all. Just stand up and say it was my bad. It was my fault. I should have done this, and move on as best you can. But again, I don't want to go down that road because we'll be here for the next 3 days. That said, you did mention your book, Heroes Live Here, a tribute to Camp Pendleton Marines Since 9/11. So what's the impetus here? Now, is this, are you trying to tell stories through pictures and everything? I mean, how does this all come about?
Yeah. So I had just done some reflection over the years and thought, how can I share what I'm seeing? So we moved from Guam back to Camp Pendleton where I work, and I was driving through base and just noticed all these tributes that I deployed from Camp Pendleton, and that's where the majority of the people that I served with, and all these tributes and things that I'd covered overseas were now being reflected back home on base. And I took some pictures. I thought maybe I could share with the Gold Star families or fellow Marine veterans who don't have access to the base anymore and share that with them. And then I thought, this would just make a nice story. So I got a couple vignettes or stories from other people to help tell that story about their experience and deployed from Iraq and Afghanistan, and put it all together in a book. And I thought, this is a great way to share it with a wider audience. And so Heroes Live Here took me about a year to put together, but I'm very fortunate that's been received great reviews from Marines. And so as long as they're happy and telling that story and trust me enough with that, then I'm happy. And so it's just a way to honor the service and sacrifice of those from Camp Pendleton. So in my research, I learned that more Marines from Camp Pendleton were either killed or injured in Iraq and Afghanistan than any other one base or station in America. So it's kind of a heavy burden for the community, the surrounding community of Oceanside, Carlsbad, San Clemente, Vista, Fallbrook. They've all been so supportive over the past 20 years. And so through the years, so through the generations, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and then this generation, the surrounding communities have played a large role in supporting the families that remain behind.
That's amazing. And I do this often, and I would love to go out to Camp Pendleton and see it just because it's inspiring and yet gut-wrenching at the same time. But I go to Fort Stewart a lot, and they have this walk with all these trees on it. And for everybody who was part of Third ID who didn't return home, and they've had over the years just to add more and more and more. And it stretches across a huge parade field and everything else. And I always encourage my unit to go by there anytime they get to just spend an hour in the morning, for go PT and go spend an hour there and just walk around and pay your respects. And when you said that, it's just like, wow, I can only imagine how honoring all those fallen people in one place, it's got to, like I said, it's inspiring, but gut wrenching at the same time.
It is. And the base is so big though, and every unit kind of has their own little memorial. So it really is just, you could spend a day driving around looking at all the different memorials. And so I just thought this is a great way to do what I can to pay tribute to these Marines through the years. And really it is 20-year generation. So the new Marines that are on base now, they weren't even born or just babies at 9/11. So this helps put in perspective for them. And it reads like a magazine really, because it's a lot of pictures and, stories. And so, I know Marines don't like a lot of text, they like pictures. It's easy to read, and it's full color, it's 200 pages. And so just some great tributes and pictures from my photos from Iraq and Afghanistan, also to depict, that combat operations over there, and just sort of making that connection between Camp Pendleton and then the forward deployed units. So it's been a passion project for me, and just, love sharing it with people.
Anytime you can do that and continue to tell those stories, especially those people who are lost, I think it's an amazing thing. I wanted to pivot with you to a little bit just about some general questions referencing, covering the military and everything else, because we touched on it a little bit at the top of the show. For better, worse, or indifferent, I have my own personal feelings on it. The military has become quite the nugget on the news for a lightning rod of a lot of things. And a lot of this did start with Afghanistan, but as much as, I would love more former vets in Congress and in elected officials. There seems to be a toxicity right now in that whole environment that I don't know is necessarily doing the military any good, because whereas all those people used to respect the military before. Now they either use it as a pawn in a game, or they take shots at it to sort of make a political point or score a political point somewhere along the line. So in your now 30 years of covering the military, I know it's hard to encapsulate it, but what has changed the most? What stands out to you the most? What do we need to do better? Sort of, explore some of these things that covering the military has presented you over the years.
Well, I think we have some really talented, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines with their photography skills or video skills. I think there's just so much talent out there. And with social media, we can connect with Americans at any time very easily. We don't necessarily need the media to amplify the message per se. But I do think there's value in making it available for all military members to kind of leverage their own capabilities, whether you're trained as a public affairs or combat correspondent or comstrat. I do think there's some great content creators out there who are in uniform. And if we can just leverage them, they may be a different MOS, not working in public affairs, but they have a story to tell and they're telling it, and they have such huge influences. They're, tens of thousands of followers out there. And if they advocate for joining the military, I think if we as public affairs, we could leverage them a little bit and help them reach people that we can't reach or that recruiters are having a hard time reaching. I think in general, we do surveys all the time of like, what's the overall impression that Americans have of military, or, it's kind of steady, but it all ties back to recruiting. So the ebb and flow of the recruiting effort is a testament of how well or areas that we can improve for telling that story and shaping, serving in the military. Is that a lifestyle that someone wants? But I think that we could be using those really talented influencers out there.
Sure. And I'm in certain cases, I don't think the military does themselves any favors in the way they choose to present themselves or what they allow to be presented about themselves. I always held to the maxim of you tell the story or somebody else will tell it for you. And I'd rather have my story out there first, my narrative out there first, before anybody else gets a crack at it. But I know a lot of commanders are not in that same vein. They're more on the defensive when it comes to when things happen, of how they want to present it, and they want to wait. And they, and I think it's the wrong way to do things, especially in 2022, where there is right, wrong, or indifferent. There is a point to being first with something as opposed to being accurate with something. But how do you think the military could do it better?
Well, I think there's a fine balancing act between releasing information or sharing too much, getting ahead of things. Oftentimes the tendency is to, I want to just wait and see, or I want to be accurate. We have to do, an investigation, or we just don't want to jump ahead and, release information or respond to queries that don't mean anything. So I do think, though, that allowing other people, other voices, instead of just controlling the narrative all the time. So it's just more of a control the narrative effort. But I think that there's some great opportunities to, partner with other activities or people to help them advocate and influence people, rather than necessarily, a senior leader doesn't necessarily connect with people 100% of the time. So there could be other ways to make those connections.
Well, I think too that there's as you mentioned, there's a hesitancy to embrace different things generationally about the military. They are very, very slow to change, and very, very slow to adjust with the times, so to speak. Yet, again, just as an example, and this is a very loose example, but it's like, we allow stuff about, this whole idea that the military has become woke to get out there first. And yet we're not telling other stories of things that we're doing, at lower levels to increase recruiting or make the military, a better option, ways that we're going to pay for education, things of that. Like they just, I wish that they were more open to catching up with the times, so to speak. And in fairness, the times move a lot faster than they can, right? There's just way too much red tape for people to be able to do it. And yet somehow the Black Beret thing got through so quickly. I can't understand how, but that's neither here nor there. That's just my own personal angst against General Eric Shinseki. It's one of the worst decisions I've ever had in my military career. But again, different discussion.
Yeah. Well, it all boils down to a talent management issue. I think that evolving the talent management piece of it will be the biggest cultural shift in, allowing people to, homestead or stay at a place longer, or, different approach to things, because they're competing with industry. And if you want top talent, you have to offer other things, benefits that other industry leaders or large organizations are offering. And so whether it's paying for graduate school or allowing people to take a year off to do things and come back to the military, these are all things that talent management and HR organizations are realizing that the next generation workforce will demand. They will want
Here's
this.
a crazy idea. And I've said this for a while, and I don't know why. Why do we not have a bonus structure for the highest, best rated people in our organization? How hard is it to institute? If you have a top block, you get a bonus. Why shouldn't there be an incentivized anything for the very top people in our organization? It's the easiest thing in the world to do, and we don't do it. Plain and simple. If your rating gets you a top block, you get a bonus check. Okay. Merry Christmas. It's little things like that are so easy. And in the grand scheme of things, what it would physically cost the military from a monetary standpoint is so small. And yet we're sitting here going, nope, you get the same exact paycheck as the schmuck at the bottom of the barrel. Why? Yeah.
All of these modernization, talent management, HR modernization initiatives need to be on the table if we want to attract and retain top talent, and communicating that. But they're probably far off from that. But I know the Marine Corps has just released, is beginning to think about talent management and listening to the workforce about what are some things that we can do to shift and change to retain top talent and make it a place where people want to work, even as a civilian or a uniform member. And so there's just some modernization that needs to occur. So I think that's going to be the next 5 years. Those are the things, aside from war fighting and lethality and maintaining, presence overseas, and especially with the Navy's efforts to, build more ships and train and develop weapon systems. But the biggest and greatest weapon system is the individual, and making sure that we have the right people and the right jobs.
Yeah, it's always a great bonus mantra. Here, you're the best at your job. I'm just going to give you more work and tougher work. So here, congratulations. Anyway, I kid, but
I know.
Extra cash in your pocket wouldn't hurt ever. Anyway, we digress. So, I want to close with this, because I think, telling the story of the military it's never going to be cookie cutter. It's never going to be easy, right? Because what we do isn't cookie cutter. It's not, as devastating as fires and bad weather and crime can be to communities and families. There's a format to doing all that. There's an easy way to do it. It's been done for a long time. Things with our organization at times are always moving and always changing, and they change a lot quicker on a grander scale than any of that ever is. And so it's not an easy job. You've been awarded many times over your career for some amazing work that you've done and everything else. When you look back on it, is there anything about covering the military that you would do differently?
That's a tough question. I'm sort of bound and constrained by what bosses want and what's the norm and what we've been trained to do and what's acceptable. But I've always tried to push the envelope, like creating the very first podcast for the Marine Corps, or the very first video TV program, or some sort of way to take a look at what's going on in the media industry and just replicate it, just do what they're doing and modernize and really kind of push people to keep current on current trends and different things. So I don't know about differently, but I could definitely, now I'm sort of in a position more to pitch ideas and make it happen and lead a team to success. So, more rank, get more trust and confidence from bosses. And so trying to push people to, let's do this. Let's just try it. How about this? Let's try that, and break the mold instead of, well, we just did that 100 times last year. How about let's try this? Hey, I saw this on Instagram. Let's do some more reels. Let's do this. How can we reach people and meet them where they are, whether it's our own workforce or we're trying to reach our local communities or other people, we're trying to reach the media. What are some new ways that we can reach people? And it's not new, but rather take a look and have eyes and ears open to what's going on in the outside media. What kills me is that when public affairs officers or people, senior NCOs in public affairs, they either don't have a LinkedIn, they don't have social media, they don't watch the news, and they don't bring anything to the table. They don't pitch ideas or understand how the sausage is made. And, they've never gone for a shadow day at a TV station and understand even how a TV story is made or edited or delivered. They don't go behind the scenes to learn. So how can you possibly meet their deadlines and understand what they're going through and be able to deliver a product to media or, whoever, if you don't engage and understand how this stuff comes together? And I worked in TV as a reporter for many years as well. So I kind of wore that civilian hat. So I understand the drive and the deadlines and the pressure behind journalism because I did it myself. And so I think that brings a great awareness. And so I empathize with them when they're can't come back empty handed. They need the story and they need the right soundbite and the right interview to occur. But I think that for people out there as communicators, just tell the story, be authentic and honest and try new things. Really, I think that's where it's at.
Good, better, and different public affairs work directly for the commander. So the number one mistake that commanders make when they choose how to message or cover their own unit or their own operation or whatever it may be.
Well, I think they have to be also in tune. They have to be out front. They have to understand the landscape and what they're saying and what they're doing. They have to know how the Google machine works and how the internet thing works and the Instagram thing works. It's a lot for a leader, but if you want to be a leader, communication is a leadership trait and it is non-negotiable. You have to understand how these things work, because if you have people working for you and that's their only focus, say for PAOs, you have to kind of speak the language and understand that as well. Not just logistics and supply and admin. You have trusted advisors, but you also have to kind of understand how all that works in order to be an effective leader.
And then finally, advice for young females coming into the military or have just gotten in the military. What do you tell them? Well,
I would say, and I'm actually stealing this from the SEAC, who said the senior enlisted advisor, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he said, just roll with the punches. You have to kind of learn to roll with the punches in the military. It's not a perfect environment. It's not necessarily built for females exclusively. So understanding that what kind of organization you're in and the culture will set you up for success. But I'll tell this to anyone, any male or female, is that understanding where you fit in, how you can make a difference, put things in perspective, and definitely find a mentor, find someone, a trusted advisor that you can, not someone you work for, but someone outside your chain of command, and really just connect with people. Look for ways and opportunities to connect, even if it's online. Follow people on social media who inspire you and roll with the punches and really lead your own life and actively decide, is this for me? Am I going to make the best of it and make the most of it?
I'm sorry, I thought that was final, but there was one more thing. Success Magazine's top 50 women of influence. I mean, that's amazing. That's congratulations. What an honor.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, among those lists, are some people you would recognize, but Serena and Venus Williams and some other leaders in the veteran space and business industry. And so, social media and telling the story has just been always a passion of mine. And I think that when we can teach other people how to use social media and communicate and share stories, it's really important, because that's just the future. It's the way that people are going to view you for job interviews. They want to look at your online persona. And if you can portray yourself and really showcase, what you have to offer in a meaningful way, I think that is very important, especially for women.
Well, again, 30 years, still going strong. I hope you hit the finish line with the same fervor and excitement that you started with, and it ends exactly the way you want it to. It's been an amazing career. Thank you so much for doing everything to cover the Marines and the military, and get the story out there. It certainly is important. And the chronicling of history, which I think, can't be underscored in any size, way, shape, or form. For years, we're going to be able to hear about more of these stories that maybe a lot of people didn't know about. But I think, again, young people, children, grandchildren are going to be able to see what their direct relatives were able to do, and the bravery and the courage and all those things. And especially those who are no longer with us. I think it's always important to have their story repeated and told routinely, much similar to what we did with Megan earlier in the show. So continued success with everything. Best of luck. Retirement, I know, will look good on you. It's right there. You can feel it. I know it. I can smell it myself. So I certainly appreciate all your time and your honesty and sharing your story with us. It's been absolutely amazing.
Well, thank you so much. Really inspiring patriotism for the next generation and making sure that we are ready for whatever our nation needs in the coming generations is so important. And as veterans ourselves, that's kind of a passion project. And thank you for everything that you're doing with highlighting people post-military and making sure that, you're sharing those stories. Thank you as well.
It's been amazing having you. Amy Forsythe, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zinno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.